Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. For today, just another short video just to round out the series on triple 4K screens that I've been doing over the last month or so. We did one initially just on the setup of 4K screens, a couple of things to think about from a hardware and a software configuration perspective. I did one on 4K streaming just last week just to talk about how I've managed to get 4K streaming run pretty well, whilst also obviously running the sim in triple 4K as well. And the final thing that I wanted to share today was around using overlays, specifically Racelab overlays, as part of a triple 4K setup. I didn't find it that easy to configure. Those of you that have watched the channel for the last couple of months will have seen through a period in the winter I actually didn't run any third-party overlays at all while streaming. Found it really challenging to get them to work without having any stuttering issues. I've overcome that, which is awesome. So now my streams are back up, have great Racelab overlays running for the viewers, while still able to have a couple of overlays that I use for me personally whilst racing as well. So that's going to be the focus for today's video, and just to start with, I just want to get into a couple of Windows settings, just a couple of configuration things to bear in mind before we get into Racelab. So with the Windows settings, a couple of things to think about. If you saw the 4K streaming video, I did cover this, and I've covered this in quite a few of my videos in the last couple of months. But game mode. So if you go into settings in Windows 11, I'm not exactly sure what it is in Windows 10. I think the setting still exists here, but it's been a little while since I've used Windows 10. But jump into gaming in the settings menu, and then you'll see game mode here, and you'll see for me game mode is switched off. Do your research on this. You know, I always encourage you to do that. You know, one person's experience may not be exactly the same as someone else's, but my understanding of game mode is this. If you are running just a single game, you don't have third-party apps running at the same time, you don't have any companion apps that you need for the game, then having game mode on is probably great because it's going to just reduce what the system is doing in the background, focus the performance on the game itself. All good. However, specifically if you're running overlays, you don't want the Windows system to be pulling any performance away from the third-party overlays or indeed any of your other companion apps whilst you're sim racing. So my recommendation, unless you're running just a single sim and no companion apps, would always be to turn game mode off and just let the CPU and the GPU manage how they are sorting out the performance resources across all the apps that are open. I have found it to be smoother gameplay switching game mode off, in particular when I've been running overlays. So, you know, if you're running third-party companion apps, definitely worth trying running with game mode off just to see if you are suffering with stutters before, see if that makes any difference. Second thing to think about, and this is especially important if you are setting up overlays that you only want the viewers on your stream to see, and they aren't necessarily overlays that you want to be seeing yourself on your main screen, and that is to try and set up a reserved IP address. What that means is every time, you know, your computer connects to your router, the router will assign it an IP address. And unless you tell the router to always assign the same IP address, it will typically rotate over time. It might stick with one IP address for a period of time, but then it may rotate at some point. The reason that this can be useful, I mean, one, just for me, quite useful knowing that my rig has a static IP address if there's any reason I need to look into network issues, but specifically for overlays, we're going to set up the overlays so that they can be seen on stream, and what we want OBS or any other streaming service to know is what is the IP address that it needs to look at, i.e. your computer's IP address. So having that static all the time is going to mean that you never have to go in and change that. If you leave it as just a rotating IP address for your main rig, then from time to time you will have to reconfigure OBS to repoint it to the IP address of your PC. So the way to figure out what IP address you actually have, you would just go into a command prompt and you put in IP config. I'm not going to run this because I would just expose all of my network adapter details, but I'll let you do that. So that will show you what your current IPv4 address is for the rig. But in order to actually create a reserved IP address, you can't do it within Windows itself. You'd need to log onto your router. You'll be able to find the directions of how to do that with your router's manual or online forums, and it's relatively simple for most routers, be it a third-party router or one that you get directly from your ISP. Typically you can go into an area of the settings and you can just look through the devices, identify the rig, and you'll be able to see that because you'll be able to confirm its current IP address inside Windows, and then you just want to set it to a static IP address, and then just note down what that is so that you have it on hand for reference later. Just a quick one on hardware or graphics acceleration, and specifically here I'm talking about the companion apps that you might have running whilst you're in the sim. So third-party overlays like Racelab, OBS for streaming, Discord, maybe you have web browsers open. All of those apps will have a setting called graphics or hardware acceleration. And in brief, what it is doing, it's making calls to the GPU as and when it needs to just support with some 3D rendering. Now, normal course of business, that's great. But when you're running triple 4K screens, you really don't want any additional performance calls to the GPU unless you absolutely need them. So my approach here is to turn off graphics or hardware acceleration for all of those companion apps. And let me just show you what that looks like in Edge, just so you can get a sense of what the setting is called. So I'll just go into settings here, down to system and performance, and then you can see here use graphics acceleration when available. Now this might be called something slightly different in Discord, in OBS, etc., but generally it'll be graphics or hardware acceleration, and the default typically will be on, so you'll need to switch it off and then reboot whatever that application is. And as I said, that just takes a little bit of extra pressure away from the GPU. It may be minor and it might be something you want to play with, perhaps one of your companion apps really relies on that GPU acceleration toggle. However, for all of the companion apps that I use, switching that off has not impacted their performance at all, but it has reduced the stutters that I've encountered during gameplay. And the last one is if you're running a fourth screen. Most modern GPUs will have 4 ports so that you can plug in 4 screens directly to it. And again, same as with the graphics acceleration portion, you want to try and take anything away from the GPU that you don't necessarily need it running. So ideally, your CPU and therefore motherboard will also have a display port. I'm running a 9800X3D and that has an extra HDMI port on the motherboard. So my fourth screen is plugged into that, which is great. So it means when I'm trying to put anything else on my fourth screen whilst racing, I know the GPU is not having to render that screen on top of the triple 4K screens that it's already rendering. So just double check if you're running a fourth screen and you're able to take the fourth screen out of your GPU, put it into onboard graphics, that's great. If you don't have that and by some miracle happen to have a random GPU, spare GPU lying around, it might be worth just plugging that into a spare PCIe port and then using that to run the fourth screen instead. But really the key thing here is if you are going to run a fourth screen and you're running triple 4Ks for racing, try and take that fourth screen away from the GPU and either into onboard graphics or into a second graphics card if you happen to have one. Okay, so I've got Racelab open for us here. Just so you know, this isn't going to be a top-to-tail tutorial on every type of layout overlay that's possible within Racelab. I'm going to use my current overlays that I have set up for both streaming and for my full screen. Just going to talk you through kind of what I use there. And the purpose really is to explain just some of the things that I've come across, which were a challenge initially of getting overlays running whilst running 4K triples, how I overcame them, and then basically what my current settings are that give me a smooth gameplay. So if you're looking for a full top-to-tail tutorial on Racelab, might be something I do in a couple of months, but for this it's going to be fairly brief and just focus on the mechanics around 4K streaming and therefore 4K overlays. First of all, let's jump into settings and just a bit of a recap. So hardware acceleration, talked about it earlier in the video. This is where that setting exists within Racelab. This isn't mandatory that you need to turn it off. However, for me, if this is on, I find I get more stutters when I'm running the Racelab overlay. So I turn this off. You'll have to restart the app when you do that. But as I said, that was something that has made smoother gameplay for me. Once that's sorted, probably going to jump into layouts. If you don't have a layout up and running, then you're probably going to want to get a new one created. As I said, I'm not going to go through that. I'm just going to take you through my current layouts that I have. And I just have a single layout for streaming. So regardless of the type of session that I'm in iRacing, be it practice, test, qualifying race, for now at least I just have a single stream set up, or single set of overlays I should say, for that stream, and that's going to be what I take you through. So first of all, just make sure when you're setting up your layouts that you understand what you're setting up. Make sure you're setting one up specifically for streaming, and therefore that's going to be the overlay that your viewers can see, but is not the overlay that you will see on either your 4-screen or any of your triple screens. If we jump into that, for now I've just got them all hidden, which is why they're all red on screen at the moment. But that's just because there's a couple of settings that I wanted to take you through initially. First of all, if you're running 4K triples, then just make sure that the resolution that your overlays are going to kind of map to for your viewers is also going to be 4K. That is assuming that when you are doing your streaming, you're not downsizing to a different resolution, which if you're running on Twitch, you may well be. So this is really focused on running 4K triples, but also running a 4K stream and having therefore a set of 4K overlays running on top of that stream. So you can see for me, 3840 by 2160, and that matches the 4K stream that I have set up in OBS. Now, as we scroll down to the bottom, something else that I talked about a little bit earlier in the video as part of the intro is just understanding what the IP address is of your rig. And you can see here, these are 2 links effectively, and these will be the links that you need to put into OBS or whatever streaming service or broadcast service you are using in order for it to pick up the overlays. And I will show you that in OBS in a bit. Now, in here, you'll see there is part of the address called localhost. My recommendation is you replace localhost with the IP address that you know is for your rig. Hence why if you have a static IP address, you can change this once and you're good to go. So you won't be able to change it within here, within Racelab. This is just a reference for the address that you need to copy into your broadcast service. So you would copy this, you would put it into OBS, but when you put it into OBS, you want to replace that local host wording that I've got highlighted there with the static IP address for your rig. By doing that, it means that once you've set that up once within OBS, you will never need to change it again. But if you have a rotating IP address from time to time, obviously that address will fall out of date in OBS and you will have to go in and adjust it. Okay, so with setup completed, let's chat about individual overlays themselves and a couple of things that I think you should think about as you're building the overlays, not only for your viewers on your stream, but also any overlays that you're trying to add for your either 4th screen or just on top of your main screen so that you can see them whilst you're driving. First thing would be just overall volume of overlays. It always seems awesome to provide tons and tons of information for your viewers, and I go between, wanting to provide as much as possible, track maps, standings, relatives, weather, as much as I can get on. And then sometimes I kind of swing back and I just reduce it down so there's a little bit less clutter for folks. So it's of course personal preference. It'll be viewers' preference. In fact, when I built my current set of overlays, I got a couple of pals that I was asking for a bit of feedback on, and they'd actually helped me make some adjustments into overlays I thought were useful for the viewer, but turned out horizontal standings being one. It looked good on stream, but to be honest, was not a particularly useful overlay because, viewers were waiting for it to scroll. So, do your research. But in terms of overall number, try not to have any overlays running that aren't providing value, which I know sounds obvious, but there are so many overlays to choose from now, whether it's in Racelab or whether it's in another third-party app, that it's easy just to fill up your screen with them, especially on a stream where you don't actually see them driving. It just can be very easy to do that. So try and limit to the ones that add the most value. The most common ones, that you'll see here, I'll start to unhide some of mine. I think standings probably essential. Any any live stream you're going to see, you're going to want a standings, especially if it's multi-class. And there's tons of ways you configure standings on Racelab, and they've got a really interesting new option. This is in the last couple of weeks, where you can see here there's an extra column of information on the right, which is going to show things like if someone has got a meatball flag, if they are currently running the fastest lap. So that was super cool. So I like that addition. But standings is probably one you always want to go for. If we look at relatives here, bottom right, another fairly typical one that you see. Now, I have used in place of relatives a head-to-head graphic here before, and again I tried that on a couple of streams. I personally quite liked it actually, because it really focuses the attention, especially in multi-class, on the cars that are around you that are in your race. However, feedback from viewers was actually no, quite like the relatives, because then you can see when you've got cars from other classes that are coming up behind you, etc. So I've now currently switched back to relatives here, but again, kind of personal preference. One thing to bear in mind, and this exists on the relatives overlay and will exist on a few others as well, is rendering FPS. So rendering FPS is quite an important setting, because the higher this number is, basically the more times the data is going to refresh, so therefore the more work it's going to put on the CPU. So I can't remember what the default was for this. It might have been 10 or 15, I think, but I've brought it down just to 5, just because I didn't think it made much of a difference. But just always double check whenever you've got an overlay and you jump into performance and size on Racelabs and you can see rendering FPS, try and bring this down to the minimum number where it's refreshing frequently enough that you're happy that the data is, still live and kind of not falling behind. But also that's just going to make sure it's not overtaxing your performance on the PC. So I've brought this one down to 5, and just something to bear in mind, I think for track map is likely to be another one that has rendering FPS, and there probably are other overlays as well that use that. So that's something to bear in mind. Another one, if you're running in different weather within iRacing, or indeed any of the other sims, I think it's great to have the weather sort of overlay up here. There's also another piece of this overlay which I don't currently run, which shows wind, which I'm kind of on the fence of. I quite like it, but it takes up a lot of screen real estate because it's another big square underneath. So I haven't been running it for now, but it is something I'm still kind of toying with. But weather, that's another great one. I get lots of good feedback on that, especially in races that are going wet and dry. It's easy for them, the viewers, to see kind of what's happening above and beyond what they're hearing from the spotter in my ear. So I think that's a pretty good one. DigiFlag, I think having any flag is going to be important. Now, of course, this is very much duplicating functionality that already exists within iRacing. I just don't really like the look of the iRacing flags, to be honest, a little bit old school. So I'm excited for them to get their new UI out, although unfortunately they missed the most current season that's coming up. So I guess it'll be in season 3, which is a bit of a shame. But DigiFlag is a really cool one, has lots of options. You can see the way I have it configured here. I have my virtual mirror in between the two DigiFlags, and I really like that because it kind of blends it in into the existing iRacing UI. By doing that, it took a little bit of fiddling, as you can imagine, because those two UI elements are from different programs, but I really like that. But there's other options for DigiFlag as well, and indeed there's another overlay entirely for flags if you like a different format. And then the last one that I currently have set for viewers on the stream is just data blocks, and I either have running the session time countdown, because a lot of the races I do are based on time, but occasionally the races I run are by laps. I think the Porsche Cup is on a set number of laps and not time, and if so, I switch these around and show the lap counter instead. So these are the ones that I currently have, and then in addition I do have a couple of iRacing UI elements that I will show when we jump into the sim shortly. But overall advice here would be try and limit the amount of overlays you're putting on screen for the viewer. Do some research with the audience, see the ones that they like, and take a good look at the overlays that have that rendering FPS setting, and try and bring it down a little bit from what the default is. If you're running triple 1440p, no big deal. Your CPU and GPU can probably handle it just fine. However, again, we're running triple 4K screens, we're streaming, we've got overlays running, so anywhere where you can save a little bit of GPU or CPU performance is really going to be worthwhile. So once you've got all of your overlays selected, configured exactly the way you want them, and then roughly got them set out on your screen, there is one huge quality of life improvement that exists in Racelab. Not sure if it exists in any of the other third-party overlay tools, may well do, so take a look. But you can just see here, background picture, upload new. Now, if you're configuring overlays on, let's say, your main screen, you may just have the sim running at the same time and you can just adjust them in here and it's pretty easy. But when you're setting up overlays for your stream, you don't really get a sense of what the viewer is seeing unless you actually have that stream active and you're in the game, and then you can see it, say, through OBS on your streaming service. However, there is a way around that which makes it a lot easier, especially when you're really trying to fine-tune where the UI elements sit from an iRacing perspective, and therefore where you want to adjust the third-party overlay elements to sit. And for me specifically, the one that's really tricky for me to align is the digiflag here, so that you can see the safety car is flashing at the moment because I'm trying to get that perfectly around my virtual mirror, and that took a little bit of time. But a quick way around that, you go to a background picture, hit upload new, and what you want to do at the same time is open up the sim, get into the car, just so that you're sat in the car. In the pits is totally fine. What I recommend doing when you're in the car is hit Alt-K, because what that's going to do is, at least in iRacing, it's going to show all of the possible elements of the in-sim UI that could show up at a given time. If you don't press that, you'll just see the ones that are active currently. But of course, when you're trying to figure out alignment for different overlays, you want to see within iRacing what all of the potential areas of the in-sim UI is, just to make sure you don't have any unplanned overlapping. But once you've done that, you hit Alt-K, you can kind of see where the elements are on the screen, then just get snipping tool out or whatever screenshot tool that you want to take. Be careful that you don't snip your entire triple screen, because that'll be a bit of a pain. You're just trying to basically grab the rectangle of your main screen. And the reason for doing that is you can save that as a screenshot, save it in your pictures, documents, wherever, and then you can upload that into Racelabs, and then that effectively gives you the what the viewers are going to see, and therefore allows you to adjust the Racelab overlays precisely without having to be in the sim and have the stream running and all of that stuff, so, which can be a bit of a faff. So I've got one up and running here, so I'll hit upload new. I've got my overlays background, and then there we go. This is a picture that I just took a few minutes ago. And as I said, what this is really useful for, especially if you have Alt-K selected, is you can just see where all of the in-sim UI elements are going to pop up. So bottom left, I still do use the iRacing relative, just because I can't see the streaming relative. So I have that there. I actually have it sat bottom left for me, so that tends to be hidden by my camera cutout when I'm racing, just because there's no need for viewers to see the relative that I'm looking at, also than the relative that Racelabs is showing. But you can see just in the middle here, I've got my driver input box. And again, this is something you can run from Racelab, but why not just have it run from iRacing? Because it probably costs a little bit less performance. So I use the one in iRacing there. You can see the virtual mirror. As I said, that's where this is most useful for me, is because I can align the digiflag either side of that virtual mirror, so for viewers it looks nice and neat and tidy, and then you can just see the general layout for everything else. So small quality of life improvement, but really makes things a lot easier to get your alignment done without necessarily having to be in the sim. I'm not sure when they made that change in Racelabs, but for me it made a huge difference, and just saves so much time jumping in and out the sim and having to make those minor adjustments until you're comfortable. Okay, let's just talk driver viewable overlays real quickly here. We spent a lot of time talking around how to set up overlays for the stream, so that's great. Hopefully they work nice and smoothly for you now. Let's say you also would like to see one or two overlays whilst you're driving from Racelabs or any other third party. So let's jump back into my layout here. You can see here for my driver viewable ones, I have ones for all 4 types of sessions in iRacing. Let's jump straight into the race one. But a couple of things we need to talk about right off the bat. Initially, I was trying to run these overlays, or at least a different set of these, on my main screen, i.e. one of the screens that was being powered by the 4090 and actually running iRacing, the sim itself. here is my experience. Every time I put any third-party overlay onto a screen that the GPU was driving, I got stutters. Didn't matter whether it was standings, relatives, track map, something as simple as weather, just something static like a data block. Every time I introduced any overlay onto my main 4K screen, it caused stuttering and eye racing. Now, this might not be the same in other sims, but my advice to you is if you do want to run a third-party overlay on top of the main 4K screen you're running, by all means give it a try, but don't be surprised if it brings stuttering. And if you're getting stuttering, turn it off, get into the sim again and see if that solves a problem. For me, there was no way around it. There's no solution that I could find with my setup to avoid that stuttering. So what did I do? Well, I've got a 4-screen. That 4-screen is plugged into the CPU, so the GPU is not having to drive it. And then when I moved the overlays that I wanted to see onto that 4-screen, stuttering went away immediately. It was just as simple as that. Now, of course, it's not as convenient for me because the overlays that you're seeing here are, above me. So I just have a couple of ones that I find useful. So standings with some limited information, weather, and then I have either the session time countdown or the lap counter. So, sure, I don't have the nice looking Racelab overlay on my main screen, which would be kind of nice to have. But at the same time, I'm able to get some basic information, which is useful whilst I'm racing at no cost to performance from a GPU perspective. So in summary, if you're trying to run third-party overlays in a triple 4K setup, by all means give it a go. Stick them on your main screen, see how it goes. If you get no stuttering, great. Maybe your setup is better able to handle it than mine. But if you do encounter stutters, that could well be the reason why. And if you happen to have a 4th screen that you have, say, for streaming or for other things, try moving the overlays up there, so long as it's plugged into your CPU and not the GPU, and you may find that resolves that stuttering issue. For me, it made a huge difference. Now, this is how I run every race, just these 3 simple overlays on my 4th screen. And so I'm able to get basic information without having any cost to performance, which is great. So to close things out, I've just jumped back so that you can see OBS, just so for the streaming portion of the overlays, just to confirm exactly how to bring those into OBS so that the viewers can see them, but you can't. This is the exact format that I'm currently using when I'm streaming at the moment. You can see there's a bunch of sources here. Let's go into the Racelab one. So we're going to properties. If you're wanting just to add this for the first time, you would hit plus here and you would hit browser. And then you can call it whatever you want, and that will become a browser source. So that is what this Racelab source is at the moment. It is a browser source. You jump into here, and what it's going to ask you for is what's the URL that you want OBS to look at, and then what is the width and the height of this browser window that you want to be looking at. So if you're streaming in 4K, then obviously the width and the height should be 3840 by 2160. And then the URL, just as a reminder, if I take you back into Racelab, scroll down to the bottom, go into the streaming session, scroll down on the right hand side. You're going to have 2 here. You can try the dark mode URL if you want. I haven't actually tried that before. I'm happy with what the standard one is, but worth a try if you want to see. But otherwise, you would just hit this copy button here, which is basically going to copy out what you can see there. And then we would go back over here. We would paste it into the URL box here. And then the key thing, we talked about this earlier, is just make sure you replace localhost with the IP address of your rig. And again, the way to find that, open a command prompt, type in ipconfig and look for the IPv4 address. Once you've got that, you would hit OK, and you may not immediately see it. As you can see here, there's no Racelab's overlay showing up, even though Racelab is running, and that's purely because I'm not in the sim. As soon as I'm in the sim and I was into a practice session or whatever, then you would start to see the overlays populating there, and then we would be good to go. That's going to be it for this one. I'd love to hear from you in the comments if you're also a 4K streamer in iRacing or another sim, and you've been able to get overlays working successfully to you, especially if you've been able to get them to work on your main screen, which for me is something that just seems impossible, either with my current setup or maybe I'm missing something in the settings. So please do let me know. I love learning more about this stuff, and as I said, it took me a good couple of months to actually get this up and running stable on my system, to have a full screen, to be 4K streaming, and to have the overlays up and running. That's all been a bit of an adventure. In terms of the channel, what's coming up next? I haven't done an update video for a little while, so I'm going to put some time into that over the next week and just share with you plans for the channel for the remainder of 2025, any key activities coming up. There will be the Sebring 12 hour, which I've just confirmed a team for. Super happy to be running with a couple of guys that I haven't run with together for a little bit of time now, so we are just getting underway in terms of our practice, so really excited for that. That should be on the 21st of March, so going to be coming up fast, and we may see a little bit more of the RS6 on the channel as we come out of winter and get into spring. We have just booked it in for a little bit more work in April, so I look forward to sharing with you the additional things we're getting done to the RS6 this year. I'm quite excited. But as always, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next one.